trusting all have found it. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. May the Lord add a blessing to the reading of his word.
Often, when I'm getting ready to do my sermon, sometimes I'll bounce an idea off my wife, and I say, "Oh, I think I was thinking about preaching on this or on that," and sometimes she said, "Yeah, that'd be a good idea," or not. And this week I asked her after last sermon, I said, "So, do you think I should, do a Christmas sermon? I mean, we're still in November." And she said, "Oh, I don't think so." So I, started working on it. And a lot of people wonder where I come up with ideas for sermons. Where do those things come from? And the majority of the time, they come from, I just preach what I feel I need to hear from God. They're not for you. Sorry to say that. They're what God has needed to say to me. And this week is no different. Do all things work together? Can we believe in all things? Think about it. Consider some of these following incidences and stories. A healthy 12-year-old girl develops severe migraine headaches. On Friday, she's taken to the hospital, and on Saturday, she dies. Her father called her the sunshine of his life. How about the young boy who goes with his church youth group on an outing? That night he comes down with a fever. The next morning he has trouble breathing. Mother calls the doctor. By the time the ambulance gets there, he has stopped breathing and they're unable to resuscitate him. The boy had died from a bacterial infection. A man feels the call to go into ministry. He leaves his good job, moves to a distant city to enter seminary. His wife takes a job to help him to make it through schooling. He's in his last year, and in just a short time, he's going to take a church somewhere and begin serving the Lord. But all of a sudden, his wife comes to him and says, "I'm leaving you. I've decided I don't want to be a pastor's wife." She walks out and never comes back. How about a policeman who stops a man known to be a drug dealer? It happens on a busy downtown street. A crowd gathers to watch the unfolding drama. There's a struggle, and somehow the drug dealer grabs the officer's gun. Someone in the crowd shouts, "Shoot him!" And he does. At point-blank range, the officer was only in his early 20s. How about the wife of two teens starts not feeling well, goes to the doctor for stomach pains. Doctor says, "Do you think you need to be hospitalized?" "No, I think I'm okay." Goes to the gastroenterologist. Has a CT scan. Nothing shows up. Has a endoscopy, colonoscopy. Nothing shows up. All of a sudden, headaches develop. vomiting. Husband takes her to the emergency room. The emergency room doctor says, I think we need to do a spinal tap. Excuse me. He comes back a little while later, says, you have meningitis. We're getting you a room upstairs. What a week. What a week. Thank you for those that have brought food. My oldest yesterday said, Dad, I think we've got a lot of food to eat for a while. Slowly, throughout the week, she's had good moments and bad. Where it came from, nobody knows. Can't figure it out. Doctor said yesterday he could send us to Europe and they would be able to figure it out with all of their testing and things they could do. I asked if insurance would pay for it. But I doubt it. Praise the Lord, she is getting better. Slowly. Some people have asked, how was your Thanksgiving? I'll be honest with you, it's been the worst Thanksgiving I've ever had. It's what it is, isn't it, David? You know, thank you for those of you that gave invitations. Sorry, I refused them. But I felt I needed to be with my boys and my wife. Do all things work together for good? Can we still believe in all things? Romans 8:28. And as Don read it in the King James Version, let me read it again. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. Let's be honest and admit there's at least two problems with this verse. This verse, they promise something we have trouble believing. And what I mean by that, it says, we know all things work together for good. I have to ask Paul, can we be so sure about that? I mean, most of us, if we're honest with ourselves, are not as sure as Paul is. We hope all things work together for good. We believe they do. But do we really know that they're true? In fact, this verse, it seems to have things in it that we think need to be left out. That phrase, all things. That seems too definite for us. In fact, all things, we might go as far as to say some things work together for good. We understand that out of difficulty we learn great lessons of faith that cannot come any other way. Yes, some things clearly do work for good. But can we truly and surely say all things work together for good? Perhaps those words are true in the theoretical sense. Perhaps they're true as a statement of faith. But are they true to every part of life? I mean, let's face it. my wife's hospitalization, being in the hospital, all week long. Yes, she's feeling a little better today, but she has good hours, bad hours, maybe a good 8 hours, a bad 16. All things work together for good. Well, let me be honest with you, Thanksgiving this year was pretty crappy. It didn't seem to work out good for that holiday that's supposed to be all about greatness, family getting together, good times, love together. I don't have to tell you, a lot of people love Romans 8:28. Many of you could give testimony to that fact. You were sick, and this verse was like medicine to your soul. You lost a loved one, and these words somehow carried you through. You were crushed and beaten by the winds of ill fortune, and this verse gave you hope to go on. My wife asked me this week, so what are you preaching on? And so I told her this verse, and she said, I'm struggling with it. I said, so am I. For many of us, it may shock you to know that there are many people who are doubting this verse. They hear this verse quoted, and instead of a balm to the soul, it seems like a mocking, cruel joke. What do you mean good? Sickness is not good. Murder is not good. Divorce is not good. Suicide isn't good. Death is not good. The hospitalization of your spouse is not good. I don't care what you tell me. It's not good. And if you were living it, you would understand it. In fact, this verse sometimes is misused by well-meaning Christians who throw it in the face of people who are suffering. As if this verse could answer all the questions of life. In fact, when it's misused in that way, it produces the opposite effect that Paul really intended for it. All things can we believe in this verse. 4 considerations I think might want to help us this morning. First of all, I'm going to read the phrase there in 3 different versions. Thank you. Of course, we read it there in the King James, but let me reread that first phrase there. Thank you so much, Sally. All things work together for good to them that love God. Oh, sounds really, really good there. The New American Standard Bible says, God causes all things to work together for good. And the New International Version says, in all things God works for the good of those who love Him. Did you hear and catch any differences when I read those different versions? Now, I don't want to come out too badly against those people that love the King James Version of the Bible. It's a great version. It's a fantastic version. But in this translation of this verse, the King James Version got all the words right, but they put them in the wrong order. Because you see, the King James Version in this verse ends with God, when in reality the verse is supposed to begin with God. That more modern translations have picked up on that and have now changed the emphasis of this verse. In fact, when we properly understand this verse, only when we put God at the beginning and not at the end. You know, sometimes we believe that life is sort of like the roll of a dice. Sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. They believe that after a tragedy, God shows up to make everything come out all right. You know, in the end, you know, God will work out, you know, everything for good. But in reality, God was there at the beginning, God was there at the middle, and God is there at the end. God is at work, not by luck or chance or blind fate. Where is God when it hurts? He's at the same place he's always been, right there with you. Romans 8:28 begins with God. That forever puts an end to the happy ever after-isms. No matter what happens, God will turn a tragedy into a blessing. Well, that's fine for fairy tales, but it's not the reality for real life. Let's be honest, my wife's going to eventually get out of the hospital, but she's still going to be fighting this meningitis for weeks, months, a long time. Wow. That's not the fairy tale ending I was hoping for. What do you say when a child dies? When a man dies on the mission field? Someone dies of AIDS? When a marriage falls apart after 38 years? It's hard to see how some of those things are good. When we look at these situations, we must all resist the cheap explanation. It's quick, it's easy. Sometimes I think we do a quick explanation because we want to avoid the pain in our own life. And if we can quickly and easily explain away somebody else's, then maybe we can feel better about ourselves. In fact, you believe if the tragedy really isn't a real tragedy, then you probably, well, if that tragedy was real, then you might lose your faith altogether. And so we want to explain away that tragedy. You know, well, don't worry, it's going to be good. Suppose you have an accident in your car. Angie, you had one just a couple weeks ago. Suppose that when the wrecker got there for the car, they said, you know, you really haven't been in an accident. Your car's just been rearranged. And you looked at the grill, you looked at the fender that's all been pushed up in the car, maybe a broken windshield, and you say, you're crazy. This car isn't rearranged, it's wrecked. It's totaled. The Bible never asks us to pretend that tragedy isn't tragedy or that pain isn't real. But the point is, we must see the active involvement of God. Does Paul say whatever happens is good? No. Is he saying that suffering and evil and tragedy are good? No. Is he saying everything will work out if we just have enough faith? No. Is he saying that we will understand why God allowed tragedy to come? No. Well, then what is God saying? God is erecting a sign over the unexplainable mysteries of life, a sign that reads, "Quiet, God at work." How? We're not always sure. To what end? Good and not evil. Little children are often afraid at night. They're scared because they can't see in the darkness. They cry out at last, and Daddy or Mommy come and sit on the bed, takes them in their arms and holds them. "Don't be afraid, I'm right here with you." The fear goes away when Daddy comes. Even so, the darkness of life frightens us until we discover that our Heavenly Father is there. The darkness is still dark, but He is there. And that makes all the difference. Can we still believe in Romans 8:28? Yes, but we need to start with God. So many things in life are unexplainable. Why does a tornado destroy one house and leave another untouched? Why does one brother excel while another struggles their entire life? Why does a tumor come back when the doctor has said that he thought he got it all? The list of questions is endless, and seen in isolation, they make no sense whatsoever. If there is a purpose behind such tragedy, we cannot see it. Our danger often is that we will judge the end by the beginning. Or to be more exact, we will judge what we cannot see by what we can see. When tragedy strikes, if we can't see a purpose, we assume there isn't one. But the very opposite is true. We ought to judge the beginning by the end. Paul says, "And we know that all things work together for good." The phrase "work together" actually is one word in Greek. Synergon. Synergon. We get our English word synergy from it. What is synergy? It's what happens when you put two or more elements together to form something brand new that neither could form separately. Some of you putting on Facebook loud, and you're very happy and proud this year that your boys are 10-1. But you've had the synergy of Dak and Zeke. Dak and Zeke. It's totally different than it has been in years past. You remove one of those elements, and I can guarantee you that it wouldn't be the same team that it is now. That's why they won't put Romo back in. Because every good coach knows that when you got a group that's working synergistically together, you don't break it apart. That's what Paul means when he says that God causes all things to work together. Many of those things that make no sense when seen in isolation are in fact working together to produce something good in our lives. There is a divine synergy even in the darkest moments, a synergy that produces something positive, and the good that is ultimately produced could not happen any other way. My father worked for General Motors, and it used to be, in the day, that they would open up a plant for tours once a year. And I remember going as a kid. It was fascinating. We would go in for a tour, and my dad would take us around on his lunch break, and we would go and see the entire process. You would see where the steel would come in, where they would roll it out. You would see the big presses that would stamp that steel and the metal, and then all of a sudden you would go and you would start to see those pieces being started to be put together, and a car being formed, and you would see the paint rooms where a car would go in and come out and be painted. You would ultimately see the finished product come off the assembly line. Something you could never see from the outside. But there was this process that would go on the inside that would create a brand new product. Paul is saying that our experience is something like that. God begins with raw materials of life, including some parts that seem to serve no good purpose. Those materials are acted upon by pressure, heat, then they're bent and shaped, joined together over time. And something beautiful is created, not by accident, but by divine design. Nothing is wasted in the process. That's how we must look at life. I'm going to be very transparent here. And I struggle with family who are sick. You see, I grew up in a family where my mother and sister could get every disease on the block. And what I mean by that is that if anybody had something, my sister and mother could talk with that person and have it in the next 30 minutes. Growing up, I would watch my sister fake illnesses. As a kid, we would get up in the morning and getting ready to go to school. Everything's going fine. We're having breakfast. And all of a sudden, my sister would be reminded that she had a test in a subject that day. And between breakfast and leaving for the car, she had a stomach ache and was in bed. As we got older, my sister got better at it. I remember getting a phone call one day while I was at the seminary, and my sister had been in an automobile accident. She was in intensive care. And for any of you that are policemen, thank you for not stopping me that day as I drove from Andrews University to Flint, Michigan in record time. I get to the hospital, and one of her best friends is there and says, I don't understand. She said, we were driving together, and we were at a red light. We were stopped. And the car behind your sister, just bumped into her a little bit, at the red light. And she said, I went over and was talking to her. You okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Everything's good, She said, but then your sister started having these like seizures and things, and they had her there in intensive care. And I'm like, wow, okay. Because I didn't know the whole story about everything. And Leanne and I were just dating at the time, and Leanne is there at the hospital, and my dad gets there about the same time as I did. That's how fast I was driving. And they're working on her in the intensive care unit. And the doctor comes out and he says, he said, I don't understand it. He asked my dad and I into a room. He said, I just don't understand it. He said, we are giving her anti-seizure medicine. He said, in fact, we've upped the dose so high that it should be impossible for her to be having a seizure right now. And she's still having seizures. I looked at the doctor and I said, "Thank you, doctor, I'll take care of it." And my dad, it's his little girl. He never seen any of the stuff that I grew up with. I walked into the intensive care room by myself with my sister. I bent over to her. I said, "Stacy, I'm here." Grabbed her hand. And I said, "Just wanted to let you know that I'm here." But I said, and I'm whispering in her ear, I said, "The doctors are baffled. They're giving you so much medicine, it's impossible for you to have a seizure. They can't understand it." And I left the room. Half hour later, my sister is sitting up in bed, joking. My sister got so good, she could fake pregnancies. Praise the Lord, she's like grown out of that. But one time I was talking with a nurse friend of mine, and she said if your sister is so good mentally that she could fake seizures at a hospital, they said it would be easy for her to fake pregnancies. In fact, my sister often has been pregnant for 2 months, 2.5 months, and lose it. And I grew up with this. Lived with this. So I have been very leery of family illness. In fact, I'm often hard on myself. In Pittsburgh, I know it was foolish, but I preached one day when I had 103-degree temperature. Hey, not good. But I still did it. Because I'm like, hey, sickness, illness, I don't care. So sometimes, I'll be honest with you, illness is a little challenging for me. The unexplainable is challenging for me. Now, I'll be honest, went into your office, we went to the gastroenterologist, CT scan came back, nothing there. Endoscopy, colonoscopy, doctor says it doesn't explain it, nothing there. In the back of my head is rolling. Oh no, is she like them? I'm being open and honest with you. Sunday afternoon, throwing up, vomiting, I said, we're taking you to the ER. Confirmed meningitis. It's been a crappy week. But the Lord has been teaching me this week that I need to be more patient and caring with my immediate family. This week has been for me. All things work together for good. But what is the good that he's talking about? Most of us, good equals things like health, happiness, solid relationships, long life, money, food on the table, meaningful work, a nice place to live. In general, we think that good life means a better set of circumstances. But once again, that's not necessarily the biblical viewpoint. The next verse, verse 29 says, "For whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son." Conformed to the image of his Son. You see, God has predestined you and me to a certain end, to be in the image of his Son. That is the good. God is at work in your life and in mine to make us more like Jesus. That's what he has predestined us for. Anything that makes you more like Jesus is good. Anything that pulls you away from Christ is bad. When Paul says that all things work together for good, he's not saying that the tragedies and heartaches of life will produce a better set of circumstances. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. God is not committed to making you happy and successful. He is committed to making you into the image of his Son. And whatever it takes to make that happen is good. So it is in the providence of God that we learn more in the darkness than we do in the light. Everything that happens to you, the tragedies, the unexplained circumstances, even the stupid choices that we make, all of it is for the gristmill of God's loving purpose. He will not give up even when we do. God is at work in your life right now, rough and uncut. God is patiently chipping away at you and I. Our greatest problem with Romans 8:28 is that our good and his good are not the same. We want happiness, fulfillment, peace, long life. Meanwhile, God is at work in us and through us, and by everything that happens to us to transform us into his Son. Does that include the worst that happens to us? Yes. Does that include the things that hurt us deeply? Yes. Does that include the times when we're heartbroken? Yes. Does that include the times when we sin? Yes. Does that include the times when we doubt God? Yes. Does that include even the times when we curse him to his face? Yes. Does that include the times when your wife is laying on a hospital bed and all you can do is sit there and hold her hand? Yes. One of my greatest compliments came this week from my wife. You know, because she's always lamented the fact that I'm a pastor and she's a teacher. And she has lamented the fact that she says, you know, I should be a nurse. I should be something like that to, you know, help out and, you know, be a bigger help. Because now she's a stay-at-home mom who is teaching our boys right where she needs to be. I keep telling her that. But this week, they're in the hospital doing things, helping her, giving her a shower, getting her cleaned up, doing things, helping to get more Sprite or ice and fill ice bags or warm blankets. And this week she looked at me and she said, well, maybe you should be the nurse. God is always at work. He is never deterred by us. There are no mistakes, no surprises. God can do that even when we can't. He does it even when we don't believe it. This is what Paul means when he says we know. We know because we know God. And he said it. His word is trustworthy, and that guarantees it. Indeed, his character rests upon it. We know not by looking at the events of our life, but by knowing God. We know it not by studying the pattern of the cloth, but by knowing the designer of the fabric. We know it not by listening to the notes of the symphony, but by knowing the composer of the music. There are many things we don't know. We don't know why babies die. We don't know often why there's car wrecks or plane crashes or families break up or people get sick and suddenly they die or they become chronically ill. But we do know this: God is at work and he has not forgotten us. But briefly, I want us to notice the limitations of this verse. It's a promise to those who love God and have been called according to his purpose. This verse is limited to Christians. It's not a blanket promise to the whole human race. Because God's purpose is to make children into his image. Therefore, Romans 8:28 is sort of evangelistic. Have you ever responded to God's call? Are you part of God's saving purpose? Can we still believe in Romans 8:28? Sounds good. We still want to believe it. But we can believe in Romans 8:28 as long as we keep two things in mind. One is that sometimes in our zeal to protect God, we try to explain away bad things and why they happen to good people. That's always a bad idea. It's enough that we love him and know that he's there. Two, Romans 8:28 is not teaching us to call evil good or simply to smile through the tears and pretend everything is okay, but is teaching us that no matter what happens to us, no matter how terrible, no matter how unfair, our God is there. He has not left us. His purposes are being worked out as much in the darkness as they are in the light. The story is told of a father whose son was killed in a terrible accident. He came to his pastor and in great anger said, "Where was God when my son died?" The pastor thought for a moment and replied, "The same place he was when his son died." It's the final piece of the puzzle. He knows what we are going through. He has been there too. And so therefore, we can say with the Apostle Paul, we know, not because we see the answer, but because we know him. And he knows what it's like to lose a son. He knows what it's like to sit there and watch somebody suffer. He knows. And we know him. Can we still believe in Romans 8:28? Without a question. Because let's face it, what is the alternative? The alternative is living life without God. I don't know about you, but since I was a young boy. I've only wanted to live life with God. And so sometimes he lets things happen because he says, Dennis, I'm trying to mold you to be like my son. So all things do work together for good.